The late, great Hubert Humphrey once said, just be what you are and speak from your guts and your heart. It's all a person has. And that's called authenticity. But what happens when you can't convince others that this is where your message is coming from? Let's have ourselves a Pocket Sized Pep Talk, because today's guest is here to help us focus on just that, authenticity and sincerity.
A Pocket Sized Pep Talk, the podcast that can help energize your business and your life with a quick, inspiring message. Now, here's your host, Rob Jollis.
Today's guest, Tom Tonkin, is the CEO and founder of the Conservatory Group, an organization that provides high-touch services to business executives that want to improve themselves, their team, and their environment. Tom has over 25 years of experience working as an executive in corporate America, most notably at Oracle. He holds a PhD in organizational leadership and a Master's of Science in organizational leadership as well. We're glad to have him with us. Welcome to the show, Tom.
Rob, it's a pleasure. And I love that quote that you started with, because that is exactly where we're going with this.
Yeah, you know, when I looked at that quote, I meant to say, and for half the audience that doesn't know who Hubert Humphrey is, I believe the senators.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'll take that back. I don't know who he is. What are you talking?
That's right. Through the magic of a podcast, Tom here is only 22 years old, so he's kind of a grizzled voice, but he's just a young'un. Anyway, Hubert Humphrey was. Did he make it to vice president? I believe he did. And he ran for president a few times. And certainly had a long and
a president. Yeah. And again, I guess that shows you the power and the impact that vice presidents have left on us in the last several decades. So. Yeah.
It's true. It's true. But you know, I want to start with your journey and you know, your study of sincerity. So everybody has a story. What's yours?
So I was all in on authenticity. I think that's the key, right? I mean, so authenticity as a common day term, as it pertains to leadership and qualities of a person, probably started in the late 90s, early 2000s. If you go to the literature from an academic perspective, which is a really good way to sort of pinpoint times and dates, it was 2005 where authentic leadership was developed and was communicated by two gentlemen, Bruce Avolio and Bernard Bass. So we go and start getting into it. I want to be more authentic food. Authentic becomes kind of this thing. As a matter of fact, till this day, right, authenticity is like a noble statement. I'm being authentic. So I was all in, but as a PhD and a student of leadership, I dug into it. And I have to tell you something, Rob, the more I dug into it, the less convinced I was that authenticity is really helpful when it comes down to relationships. Let me say that again. Authenticity is not very helpful when it comes down to building relationships. Why is that, Tom?
Why is that? Yeah, believe me, I'm just fixing my jaw. Hang on one second. Click. Why is that, Tom?
I say that tongue in cheek, sort of, because I asked myself that same question. I literally said, why is that, Tom? Fundamentally, authenticity is what's called self-referential. Authenticity is something that is defined, measured by self. You, Rob, are the only person in the planet that knows what Rob is thinking and who they really are. The only way I could find out more about you is how much you want to let me in. The transparency aspect of it. Sometimes you allow more transparency to people. Maybe the closer they are, the more transparent you are. Your vulnerability kicks in. But I couldn't get away from the central definition that authenticity is self-referential. Then the best analogy that I could come up with as it pertains to relationship was the golden rule versus the platinum rule. So those in the golden rule, right? We grew up this way. Treat others as they would want to be treated. Treat others as you would want to be treated. That's the golden rule. Platinum rule, by the way, I already let it out. Treat others as they want to be treated. We all know how we want to be treated. But Rob, the way I want to be treated may not be the way you want to be treated. And if I'm trying to build a relationship with you, then that's kind of useless, really. It's easy because I know me. I don't really know you. And so that's where we start thinking, okay, well, then authenticity is not going to be helpful, because if I take my cues from who I am and the self-referenceability that I bring to the conversation, that's not going to be helpful if I'm trying to get to know you, because I'm going to superimpose assumptions. I'm going to superimpose values, everything that goes with it. Doesn't build our relationship if I don't get to know you. By the way, it works the other way too, Rob. You need to get to know me and my values so that we can have this two-way street.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, okay, what's the answer?
Hold on to the answer for a second. I want to pick apart the question just a little bit. Because truly you're a contrarian. I mean, you're coming from a different angle, and I love it, by the way. I love different angles. There's the personal side, and there's the professional side. I'm not that. I work with a lot of salespeople, and so salespeople a lot of times they'll say, "Well, I remember I was working with a law firm. The guy said, I said, I'm just curious, where do you sit and where's the client sit?" He said, "I sit on this side of the desk and the client sits on the other." And I said, "How come?" He said, "Because that's where I'm comfortable." And I said, "I'm sorry, I lost track of who the client was again." What if it's a very social client? I have a round table in my office for the social clients so I can get next to them. In other words, I am trying to figure out who they are and kind of like a chameleon sort of move to that. But I'm thinking like a sales guy right now. So yeah, you're coming from a different angle, because I'm trying to show you who I am, but I'm also trying to adapt to what's around me.
The point behind this idea of authenticity is that it's supposed to be transparent to other people and increase your personal views, values towards others. Emanate. So for example, you even hear authenticity, at least the paradigm of authenticity, seep into cultural terms like, "Hey, Rob, I'm just saying," as if I can now have an excuse to say whatever I feel like saying.
Right. To be honest with you,
I'm just being real, man.
Yeah.
Right? And all of a sudden, the response, if I say, and we were talking about this earlier, "Rob, I don't know if orange really looks good on you, man. Hey, look, I'm just saying, I'm just trying to make it real. Just be real." And your response should be, "Oh man, thanks, Tom. Really appreciate you just being yourself and being real." How helpful was that in establishing a rapport or a conversation? Now, people would say, well, people are being honest with you, but I'm not necessarily sure that that's helpful, as opposed to maybe I should say something like, "That's a really interesting shirt. What brought you to pick it?" Now, I'm kind of using the shirt example as something, but it could be anything. A particular value, a particular event in your life, a particular life choice that you've created. I think it's more interesting to find out about your conclusion. How did you come to that conclusion?
Right.
As opposed to stating how maybe that conclusion isn't something that you believe in.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely finding safe ground there. It's funny because I think that sometimes I use the word believability and authenticity. I want people to be believed. You use the word sincerity, and so I think this is going to help me, and I hope anybody else listening, kind of carve in a little bit deeper into this. So, all right, I've got your version of authenticity, and I picked myself back up off the floor. What is the difference between authenticity and sincerity?
So we pick up the journey when I figured out that authenticity is not really something that's going to be helpful for relationships. I didn't know it was going to be sincerity. So you research like a good little researcher would do and say, let me go find out what it is. And for those that are readers and are interested in this topic, there's a book by the name of called, happily so, Authenticity and Sincerity by Lionel Trillian, written in 1972. Now, I'm giving you these dates. Remember, I said authenticity was sort of galvanized or codified in 2005. But there was a book in 1972 that made that initial comparison. So I went there and read it. Now, what's interesting about that book, if you were to read it, it would say that authenticity is really the way to go versus sincerity. But I started picking it apart. And there's this idea that people were clouding themselves in being phony. And his thesis was, don't be phony, be authentic, show people who you really are. Okay. But then let's take that to a relationship, which I think we've taken a good thing and potentially applied it in places maybe it shouldn't be applied. If you read Sincerity, it's all about others. For example, you can be authentic in a room by yourself. Can't be sincere in a room by yourself. You need somebody else to be sincere with. And sincerity really means I have your best well-being in mind. And the problem sometimes is that sincerity doesn't sound fun, because I may turn around and say to you, you know, I'm not necessarily sure that life decision you made, Rob, is really good for you. That's being sincere because I'm looking out for you, as opposed to saying, hey, that's just not for me, man. I mean, you do you, I do me. I'm just being real, dude. So the problem there becomes is now you have, I wrote an article for a magazine, heck, 6 years ago on this. So long I've been thinking about longer, but that's where I talk about this idea of the banner of nobility. Hey man, I'm just being real. I'm just laying it out. You do you, all of these little statements that comes by, as opposed to sincere saying, look, I'm looking out for the best of you. And by the way, let me tell you how I came to that conclusion, or maybe you can share with me how you came to your conclusion. Now, I'm going to stop talking and let you answer the question, which one do you believe would establish a better relationship?
Well, I think sincerity. I think the latter. I'm for sure. I got you. It's just it's, you may not know this, but I've actually written a book on authenticity. Yeah. And if you listen to 160 podcasts, I mentioned my book twice. I don't like talking about my books because I want to talk about you, but you're into a topic that I'm really aware of, and it means a lot to me. And I have never separated sincerity from authenticity. Now I see where you're living. I've kind of bundled it together.
Because the other thing, if you're talking about it, let's take the next level deeper.
Okay.
So let's get real nerdy now that you've divulged yourself as an authenticity person.
I was just being real with you, man.
And I feel all warm inside. Not really. No. So if you go back to literature, 2005, I talk about these two gentlemen. They came up with 4 dimensions of what authentic leadership was. So number 1 is self-awareness. Number 2 is transparency. Number 3 is internalized morality. And number 4 is something called balanced processing, which means I consider others when I am making a decision. So that's probably the only part of those 4 things that has anything to do with anyone else. Self-awareness, I mean, it's in the name, self.
Right.
Transparency, obviously that's transparency with us. And internalized morality. Basically, again, what's my internalized morality? What's my moral compass? And these 4 dimensions compose of authenticity. So again, if you take a look across those, the dimensions themselves are self-centered, right? They use you as self-referential. There's a great article. Again, when I talk about articles in this context, I'm talking about academic journals, which is basically the highest fidelity of data you can find. I did my own research when I said, okay, this doesn't seem to be helpful. What are my dimensions in sincerity? So I did, as a matter of fact, in my PhD dissertation, it's about this. Mm-hmm. That's how serious this is. And I came up with 3 dimensions. The first one is empathy. The second one is this idea of altruism, but sort of this non-manipulative type of altruism. And thirdly is demonstrable affirmation. meaning I am affirming you in some way of demonstrable, a way that you and I can see that I'm affirming you. Think of those three things now as those are all about others. Just like the 4 dimensions of authenticity were self-centered or self-referential.
Yeah.
In sincerity, it's others-centric.
Yeah. Let me jump in.
Yes, sir. Please do.
Yeah. You know, the challenge, welcome to the party. Because like I said, I write about this too. The challenge is really creating a repeatable, predictable process for what you're describing.
Yep.
And I'm an ex-Xerox guy, and man, we didn't tie our shoe without some sort of process. But my favorite saying is, when you have a process, you have a way of measuring what you're doing, and when you can measure it, you can fix it. And you're in an area, from what I can tell, and you can correct me. I know I struggled with it. I'm trying to build this measurable, repeatable, predictable process for, on my side of the line, authenticity. And I know we got apples and oranges here, but we're in the same family.
Yep.
And what I found was that I can't really build a process. I can show you a bunch of best practices. I can show you a slew of things to do. And the more of these you do, the greater your chances of achieving your goal here. But they're not going to be linear. They're not going to line up. It doesn't start with 1 and end at 4, in a sequence. It's just behavioral moves. When you say empathy, for instance, to me, it's not necessarily a process move as much as a behavioral move, but that's where I struggled. So I can see where, I think we're kind of brothers on this one in terms of, welcome to the party of, it is, if you're looking for a process, you might not find it. If you're looking for a bunch of behaviors that are going to make you more successful, you've come to the right party today. Am I on board?
Yes, sir. And I'm ready to give you some of those, especially from a sincerity perspective.
All right, let's go.
So how do I become more empathetic? This is a chapter that I've completed in a forthcoming book called Sincerely Yours.
Hey, when's that book coming out?
Oh man, I would like to have it out before Christmas.
All right. You hear that, Pocket Sized Pep Talk world? This man's coming out that book's coming out before Christmas. We're going to hold you to it. So now that you've just said that, that's going to be some added impetus. Get writing, brother. Get writing. Yeah. All right. Keep going.
So empathy. So by the way, it's all like the book, the chapter, it's got like how long it's going to take you. What are you going to learn? Right. So it's very operational. That's important to me.
Good.
So here's a piece of the research. So there is this video, believe it or not, by Alan Alda, the actor from MASH.
Yeah, no, he had a very successful book that came out a few years ago that was kind of in there. Is it related to that book?
Yeah. So so when I was researching the operational aspects of it, I came across him in the book, and he basically said that empathy ended up being very important to him, but he wanted to know how to practice it. So he made up a little game. And the game that he made up was, I walked down the street and I tried to project what people are doing and feeling by how I see them, how I look. And so maybe I see a mom and the kid, and she's giving them ice cream. And maybe he got a good grade, and she's rewarding them. And like you start creating these backstories. And so he's looking and watching, and he's smiling and nodding and all this other stuff. And so he felt really good about it. He ran across a social psychologist like myself and said, you came up all this by yourself. Why don't we study it? So they put some rigor behind it. They went in to put an academic paper. And here's the punchline. The punchline is, it's not about the empathy part, but it was about the noticing. That was the one that moved people into a sincere kind of empathetic view. People got charged in a positive way when they felt that you were noticing. Now, let me tell you something. Aren't we all bent over, hunched over into our cell phones and iPhones and Androids, looking at some other world? You see memes and pictures of people like some fancy parade is going by and everyone's trying to take pictures, as opposed to just watching the freaking parade and just enjoying the moment. So the way we can start being more empathetic, just notice people. Just notice them. Look, and just watch them. And then you'll start feeling that empathetic view, that backstory that may come up. I've taken it to a step further and I ask questions. And
that's the best way to notice people. The best way to notice people is to get them to ask those questions, which takes more work than making statements, and then sincerely listening to their answers.
I was waiting at a conference. I was outside. I was meeting a client at a hotel. This lady came out with a big smile on her face, and I just noticed her and I smiled back. She noticed me and she launched into, today was Helen's birthday. Helen passed away 8 years ago. And every birthday for Helen, I come to this hotel and we do all the things that Ellen used to love to do. She loved to go in the spa, and there's a favorite meal here. And by the way, after I'm doing the spa, I'm going to have lunch by myself in memory of Ellen. And, I asked her what her name was, and she said, "My name is Mary Joy, emphasis on the joy." Smile back, left. That's it. It all started with me just noticing this person walking by, smiling, looking. She launched into that. She felt as if she needed to tell me this. Well, hard not to be empathetic at that point.
Right.
I'm sure your listeners, hopefully, after that story, are being empathetic to Mary Joy as well.
I love that. And you know what? I really appreciate that, Tom, because that to me is a process behavior. That's something that we can measure. That's something we can do and we can fix. And that's really great point you just made, and so simple. And yet, how many times, you're right, are we looking down, looking around? As you were talking, I was looking around, making sure that my wife wasn't hearing this, because she is on the warpath of where she's an artist. So she doesn't like when people's faces are down and looking at their cell phones and not observing the beauty of this world.
There's a lot to do that. And so there you have it. That's how, if those that are wanting to do that. Second dimension, what I spoke of, this idea of altruism and more of a non-coercive. So the academic literature really is kind of still split on altruism as a whole, because altruism in its purest definition is I'm doing something with no reward, right? The problem is people suggest that thing you're doing, maybe that charity or whatever you're doing, is giving you the sense of accomplishment and reward. So therefore, it's not really altruism. I'll tell you how to practice that in a sort of beneficiary kind of way, where you get something out of it. Usually that kind of altruism gets triggered with some kind of social injustice. Okay, so notice how these things go in order. So you have the noticing of empathy. While you're noticing, you might get Mary Joy telling you about Ellen and her passing away and all that. And then you just, commiserate or just enjoy that passing moment. There may be another time where you notice where there's a social injustice occurring. That's when you have to take action. That's where that non-coercive altruism kicks in. Now, that social injustice, for whatever reason, I'm having a hard time with that word, can come in multiple forms. It's basically whatever you think it is. But your gut and your mind and your heart will tell you what that is. The question you have, then, you want to practice that, since that dimension of within sincerity, you have to take action. What is it that you can do to alleviate that injustice? I'm going to give you an example that, from a corporate perspective, that kind of drives me a little nuts. So I help executives at all sorts of different levels. There was an executive that one time called me. It was a Friday. And he said, Tom, I just got out of my weekly meeting. These people are so apathetic. There's people, they don't do anything. If anything, they like sit in the same chair, even if somebody's no longer there, they're on vacation, they sit in the chair. They just don't do anything. And so I said to him, well, what did you do? He goes, what do you mean, what did I do? Yeah, what did you do? Well, I didn't do anything. So they're just doing what you did. You did nothing, they did nothing. Are you telegraphing apathy? Are you smuggling away the solution with the blame? So here's an important point that I'm trying to make. When you blame someone, something, or your circumstances, true or not, you are also smuggling away the solution. Yeah. And so my point is, going back to the injustice point of this, if you look at a social injustice and you point to it and you come up with 18 different reasons why that is happening and you're not part of it, there's nothing you can do.
Yeah. You know what is confusing to me, and we're coming down the home stretch here, but I get you. And, social injustice was a great example you used. But what about, and I'm selfishly referring to me right now. What about all some of the things that we try and do for charities, or that we're trying to help others? And I really connect to your statement of people that talk about it all the time. To me, I question, are you doing it to help others? Are you doing it so you can tell everybody how you help others? So my knee-jerk reaction is, not only do I keep it a secret, basically, but if somebody knows about it and asks me about it or says something nice about it, I immediately brush it off. I'm extremely uncomfortable talking about it because I don't want to fall into that category. Help me.
What category are you falling into?
I'm falling into the category. I'm going to use a name, and I don't want to use this name, but I'm going to use the name. I in my mind, and you now, you and whoever's listening is I'm outing it. I used to call it in my head the Kathy Lee Gifford effect. I actually gave it a name. I know she's probably a wonderful woman. I've never met her. And so I have nothing against her. I think she's a lovely person, but she would talk about the things that she did so much that I just thought I was getting nauseous. Stop talking about it so much. I'm questioning why you're doing this. And so in my head, I was like, I don't want to fall into the Kathy Lee Gifford effect. Does that help, Tom? That's where I'm coming from.
Well, no, but my point is, if you're prompted, then absolutely. But she's not prompted.
Right.
She offers that information outside. And I think that's the big distinction.
Right.
I don't tell anybody anything. However, if I'm prompted, I will.
Right.
But that's it. Kathy Lee or a handful of other people, the name dropping that goes with it is usually unprompted. And that's where I think we get the feeling of, well, wait a minute, I didn't even ask you this question. It doesn't even matter to me.
I think it's falling into sort of, I'm sideswiping another issue, which is, and really I've written about this. So people who share this with you, you'll know what I'm talking about. It kind of falls into the category for a professional speaker, as an example, of receiving compliments. I'm uncomfortable receiving compliments. And I know that sounds weird, but I don't want to do things for the compliments. Now, I did have a few Barrett Kohler authors, friends of mine, who really sat me down and said, you're blowing it here. But these are people that are going out of their way. It's meaningful to them to come up and say this to you. When you shut that down, you're embarrassing them. You're actually harming them. And Tom, that's what helped me get over it and just learn how to graciously accept a compliment. And I think that's really what I'm trying to fit in here, which is, if somebody asks me about it, I'll respond to it. If they say something nice and kind about it, I will respond to that in kind. And then I'm running for the hills. I don't want to stay there too long.
I would say the following, because I was able to do okay when I did public speaking, people complimenting. Let's face it, it feels good to be complimented. In that sense, you feel like you added value. But the part that really used to make me very uncomfortable was I was a professional musician for many years, and I now play at church. And it's gotten to be a point where I've played at many churches just to help out. By the way, I'm a bass player, been playing for 42 years. And sometimes I'll go to a church that is very small, that they don't have a lot of musicians. And I actually did that 2 weeks ago. They needed somebody. They were out in the park. They kind of wanted a good showing. And so they asked me if I would sit in. And so I sat in, and invariably I actually have 2 texts that came in the other day, thank you. That was great. Thank you. And the way I've sort of dealt with that, and those that are listening, is more of, I'm glad that was helpful for you. Right. That's another sort of sincere thing you can take.
Wait a minute. I really enjoyed your music playing. I'm glad that was helpful to you.
Yeah.
There's a long pause here, ladies and gentlemen, because I'm pausing. I want to do it one more time and then fit it, and then I won't question again. I just heard you. I saw you last Tuesday playing at our church. It was just so glorious to have music, and you're such a talented bass player. I just wanted to tell you that. And your response is?
I'm glad it was helpful for you. The reason I say that is because you were prompted to come and tell me that, which means somehow I moved you inside in a positive way. Okay. So if my bass playing moved you in a positive way, then I'm glad that has occurred, because that was my intention.
Yeah, I think what I'm saying is I have my standard sentence that I like to throw on top of it, which is, and I'm so grateful that you came up and told me that. It means the world to me.
But see, now it's your gratefulness.
Did I lose my sincerity?
No, but that's your gratefulness. I'm grateful that you said something to me.
Okay.
As opposed to saying, I'm glad it was helpful because it moved you in a positive way to take this action of coming up to me.
Okay. All right. Let me hit you with one more question.
Sure.
When you talk about sincerity, you talk about authenticity, even the words that you used and I used, and we have our own style, fantastic. But when I hear you say it, I believe you. When you hear me say it, I hope you believe me. And yet I think there's half the population out there that might be listening right now and say, I try and say that, and it's almost like as a musician, it's almost like I don't have the tune right. In other words, it doesn't come out the way you just said it. It sounds more monotone. It sounds more flat. It sounds less sincere. And so, and my final question to you is, talk to them. Talk to people who will say, I'll say just what you said, Tom, but when I say it, it doesn't feel right. It doesn't sound the way you say it. How do we help them?
Well, I mean, I think the thing is, what I've tried to do in this podcast is given everybody an operational definition. What you now need to do is find your voice as to how you go about solving that problem. I have seen, and so what happens is, please don't use my words if they feel uncomfortable, if they don't work for you, because those are not your voice. It's my voice. And that's something that I think, Rob, you and I can agree on. We have developed and continue to develop this for many, many years.
Right.
So it's not something that shows up. So this isn't a prescriptive action. It's more of a prescriptive definition that allows you to then go find your voice as to how you actually get to that end result. Far be it for me to suggest that there's only one way to be sincere. And that's so my research, just to let everyone know, is I have interviewed qualitatively many, many people. And I've came to these 3 dimensions. But when you do the qualitative view, what you're doing is you aggregating these views. If I were to give you the transcripts of every interview I've done, they look completely different.
Yeah.
But they all had their voice, and it was my challenge to generalize what is it that they're trying to land on.
Yeah.
And so in that sense, trying to generalize an individual skill on a podcast is challenging. I would love to sit down with everybody. But if I'm talking to the individual listener right now, once you understand operationally what I'm talking about, go practice and find your voice.
Perfect. And Tom, you hit on something really important, which we don't even have to be talking about this topic. It's many tasks that we do. And I like your term. We could fit that term, find your voice, into many different categories.
Correct. Yes.
Not somebody else's voice, your voice. And I think if I've got you right, if you want to be sincere, do it your way, sound your way. Only thing I'll add to that, if I could, I'm an auctioneer, a charity auctioneer. We call it salting the item. I'm just gonna put a little salt on top of it, which is find your voice and be in the moment. Trust your voice. So don't worry about everybody else. If you are truly feeling grateful, and not what am I going to say to make this person believe that I'm feeling grateful, but if you actually, like an actor, get into that character, get into that moment, block everything else out, you don't have to worry about the tune. The tune will follow, and it will be a sincere tune, even if it doesn't bounce around like Rob and Tom. That won't sound sincere from you. So it's sort of a trust your instinct and just take yourself to a very sincere place in your brain, and the tune will follow the right way. That's my version of it.
I'm not going to add anything to it.
Well, watch this. I am very grateful that we had an opportunity to talk. Folks, you can't see it, but we're both wearing orange shirts for some bizarre reason. I explained I have all of one orange shirt. I never put it on, and Tom already made fun of me about it. But in any case, I really have. I've enjoyed the conversation. I think we got at some really cool stuff today. You heard a few clicks during this because this didn't go in necessarily the direction I thought it was going in. I was waiting for some pretty standard answers, and we've learned that our man Tom here doesn't believe in the standard answers. He's really looked into this, and his book's coming out. That book's gonna be written by the Christmas time. We know that. So hopefully, we'll start seeing it on Amazon, at least a pre-launch, probably in the fall, and we're going to make sure that we get that word out there. But I really am. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have met you, to talk to you, and thank you for teaching me a bunch of different things today. That was really helpful for me. Thank you.
Thanks for having me, Rob, and appreciate your listeners.
You bet. One last question: how do people get a hold of you?
My claim to fame is if you Google my name, Tom Tonkin, I will be the first page on Google, LinkedIn, Twitter, Voxer, Dr. Tom Tonkin.
Okay.
I believe in lowering the barrier of entry to conversation.
Good. Good. But he's a simple man, ladies and gentlemen, a simple man. All right. Well, we'll do it again as well as we can next time. Until then, everybody, stay safe.
Thanks so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's show, please rate and recommend it on iTunes, Outcast, or wherever you get your podcasts. You can also get more information on this show and Rob at jollis.com.